Okay, so now to stretch. Let's see if I can get the right angle. Okay, so this is a table. You can see the table's about just below hip height. So to start your stretches, what I'll do is I'll do the stretch kind of like the origin of my hamstring. And in order to do that, you take, like I said earlier today, you take one foot, put it up here, and then you're going to take that same side leg, wrap it underneath and to the inside. And your goal is to take this knee that's up on the table, or of the foot that's on the table, and you're trying to direct the pressure up towards the ceiling. So you're trying to get it up above your head. So you want to still keep a flat back, keep your chest up, and push that knee up. So I'm sort of taking this elbow under here and pushing up into my leg to create a stretch kind of in my groin. It's going to come up the inside, but it's also going to be underneath. The more you lean away from that leg, the more it's going to be into the groin. The closer you keep your shoulders to your knee, the more it's going to be perfectly underneath in the hamstring. And I will hold that stretch for anywhere from 60 to 120 seconds. If you want to stretch your lower back, which probably you won't do now, but if you want to, you can just sort of let your body hang too. That's going to create somewhat of the same stretch in your hamstring as well as a stretch in the QL of your lower back. Your goal right now is not to stretch your lower back, it's to stretch your hips. After that, I'll do the other side. So I'll always do symmetrical stretching. I'll do one side and then the other. Then I'll come and do a straight leg stretch with my hamstring. And I'll do this with the toe pointed. So that takes the calf out of it and stretches more of the insertion of the hamstring. So I'll stay here, and again, all these stretches are done with a neutral spine. Your basic goal here is to stretch the hips. So you're creating angles at the hips. Not like cup shape, but like perfect angles. Okay? So I've got a perfect angle here versus being rounded over. So I've got this perfect angle, and the only stretch that I feel, the only tension I feel is right here underneath my hamstring. Now you can do that to stretch the perfect, like, I guess the meat of the muscle. If you can stay upright, you can then reach the opposite arm towards your toe, stretching more your IT band. And then you can also face, kind of open your hips up and stretch more of the adductors as well. You're going to want to do all three. I mean, you can hold all three for anywhere from like 60 to 120 seconds. Basically, at this point, the more you stretch, the better. Okay, and your hamstrings are an important muscle to stretch. Next, you can either stay in this, you can stay in the same position, but if and stretch your calf by just basically grabbing your toe. That's kind of hard to do for me. See my back round, so what I will do is basically just stand up straight and find like basically take like a phone book and put it underneath my toe. And stand straight up so that basically, some sort of elevated surface. Like this guy right here, I'll put my foot right on top of it and stand up so that if my foot's on there and my hips are perfectly flat, I'm basically creating the same hamstring stretch, but see the angle is not quite as acute. It's a little more open because I'm now stretching my calf. Okay, after I'll stretch my hamstrings, I'll then stretch my glutes. Because the thing is if you try and stretch your glutes before you stretch your hamstrings, the hamstrings are going to be the limiting factor, and you're actually going to feel stretch in the hamstrings whenever you're trying to stretch your glutes. So you kind of stretch the longer muscles below the hip here, your hamstrings, and then you'll stretch your glutes, and then we can go to the quads. So again, this stretch is, as you can see, my knee is facing directly out from my hip. It's not too far over to the left. It's at least directly out in front of the hip, and then this angle right here at my knee is 90 degrees. So I basically, in order to ensure that, I push my other leg that's standing on the ground down here all the way up against the table, so it forces me to maintain this position. And then I'm basically just taking this side on, pressing it flat up against the table, extending the elbow so my tricep is tense, and just reaching right out over this leg. And again, in that position, I'm maintaining a flat back. So I'm creating a sharp angle at my hip. I'm not rounding over. This stretch is the exact same as this stretch. And your goal through all of this is to maintain a neutral spine, which is keeping that nice flat lower back. And I just basically hold this stretch. I can reach more towards the outside. I can reach directly over, or I can reach more towards the inside. You'll feel that it creates stretches in different parts of the muscle. The more I reach to the outside, it stretches more my glute med, kind of the upper higher part of the glute. I stretch straight ahead or just a little bit over, it stretches more the meat of the muscle down in the glute. And if I reach across towards the inside, then it's going to stretch almost part of the hamstring as well, like the origin, a deeper part of the glute also. So you'll do that on both sides. And I'll do that stretch sometimes twice on each side, up to 2 minutes each time, or until the muscle goes numb. So I start to feel a tingly feeling. The next stretch. Is a quad stretch. So I'll take a bench or any elevated surface. It can be like the back of your couch. Or excuse me, the front of the couch where you would sit. Place a towel or a pillow on the ground. To protect your patella. Your goal here is to draw your waist in tight and to contract the glutes. So you're trying to keep your pelvis tilted up. The top part, the top pointed back, bottom forward, because you're trying to open up this part of the hips. You're basically trying to open this up in front of you. So it's not going to do me any good if this knee extends real far forward and my back is arched. See, that's the same position here. That's the same stretch as I would be getting in this position with a perfectly flat back and my shoulders upright. So you're here, draw your waist in tight first before you have any stretch here, and then contract the glute. And that's going to create your stretch. Now the muscle we're stretching is the rectus femoris first. It's a very long, thin muscle that runs over both your hip joint and over the knee joint. It's just a very long, very fragile muscle. If it's tight, it's hard to do lunges and it's possible to strain this muscle. So you're stretching the rectus femoris first, the most superficial muscle. It's on the outside. After you've stretched this muscle, you're going to get down into the quads as well. You're going to start getting into the quads. You're going to feel those. And now, when you're doing this, you can shift your hips a couple different ways. You can shift, if I'm pointed straight towards you, pushing forward, I can take my front leg and put it across my hip and push forward, feel it more towards the outside, or I can take it wide and lean towards the inside, and I'll feel more of a stretch in the groin. After I've done that on both sides, 60 to 120 seconds, I'll then drop the foot with the exact same position. Just like so. So now that I've stretched the more superficial muscles, I can get the deeper hip flexors, the smaller muscles, by doing the same thing, by driving my hips forward. It's the same position. You're now going to feel a much more isolated stretch right here in the front of the hip. And again, you can also do the same thing. You can take your foot and shift it across the midline of your body and stretch more of the outer part. You'll get into the TFL some here that attaches to your IT band, or you can shift it out to the left side and press forward and get more of a stretch in the interior part of your hip. So that's pretty much all the stretching. You got the origin hamstring up high with the knee foot on the table, the insertion, then your calves, then your glutes, then your rectus femoris and quads, and then your hip flexors. And at the end, I'll usually pick one of the stretches I was tightest at if I have time and go back and do that same stretch again. And the same thing with the foam rolling. After I finish the foam rolling, before I begin my stretching, if my glutes were really tight, I'll go back and hit those one more time briefly and then begin the stretching.